Welcome back to the Expat Files. Tay Nix here. My very special guest today is the one and only George Gammon of the Rebel Capitalist podcast and channel, and maybe the best financial education you can get available today. And I mean that sincerely. And by the way, I'm not the only person who also thinks that. So, George, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk to people today. Thanks for being here. And we'll get to the Rebel Capitalists. We'll get to some of the stuff that you're seeing in markets today. But just take people back to your journey. You're in Medellin at your headquarters there. I've been down there. Lovely town, maybe one of the top three cities on my list in the world. Fabulous lifestyle. How did you end up going international? Take people back in your memory and sort of what you were going through and sort of what led you to go international and why Medellin?
Well, opportunity first and foremost. So not just financial opportunity, but opportunity to have more personal freedom and liberty in my own life. So I retired in 2012 and I was 38 years old. And at the time I was in Vegas and I never really got into the whole libertarian thing. I was never really political at all. I just knew that I disliked pretty much all the politicians and all the political parties. That was about the extent of it. But then when I retired, well, I didn't have to, but I wanted to manage my own money because I didn't have a lot, but I had enough to where if I was getting like a 5% return, I wouldn't have to go back to work. And so I wanted that flexibility, let's say, but I wanted to be the master of my own destiny. And in business, one of the things that I learned very, very quickly, which led to my success, was you got to know what you don't know. And most people, it sounds very, very simple, but it's actually hard to do that because most people let their ego get in the way and they think there's nothing they don't know. That's as my I don't want to say my mentor, but probably my favorite investor, and I've had the opportunity to talk with him many times, Jim Rogers. That's a quick way to the poorhouse. Uh, so I knew what I didn't know, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what the Fed was. I didn't know what the bond market was.
Wow.
I was just zero. And so, but I wanted to learn and I wanted to, again, be in control of my own destiny there. I think that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit in me.
Yeah.
So I started listening to podcasts and audiobooks and watching YouTube videos. And the first thing that really resonated with me was Milton Friedman's Free to Choose series that he did back, I believe it's the late 70s or early 1980s. And I found it on YouTube when I was in Singapore, of all places. And that just really took me down the rabbit hole. From there, I was introduced to Thomas Sowell, to Doug Casey, to Peter Schiff, Rick Rule, Chris McIntosh, Jim
Heavyweights.
Rogers.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these people, as far as not being introduced to them face to face, but introduced to their videos, their content, and their ideas. And the more I listened, the more that message of individual liberty and freedom resonated with me. It's something that I instinctively believed, but I never really thought about it too much until I heard them discuss it and communicate it. And I'm like, you know what? That they're spot on. They're absolutely spot on based on just my worldview and my experience as an entrepreneur, as an employee and growing up and having the opportunity to live internationally, I knew that they just hit the nail on the head. So I was always very skeptical, uh, and let's just say suspicious of government. And I think as an entrepreneur, everyone would fall into that. It didn't matter if you're on the right, on the left, whatever. If you're a successful entrepreneur, it you are heavily jaded on the, let's say, efficacy of government because you have to deal with government so much and you know how inefficient it is and it drives you crazy. Even I don't care what, political uh, side of the spectrum you're on. You just, if you have to do a couple projects where you have to deal one on one with the government for long periods of time, it'll turn you into a libertarian very, very, very quickly. So,
Yeah.
and then it just became increasingly worse in the United States, and to the point where, before I was a little, I just kind of had my blinders on because I was so focused on making money that I really wasn't cognizant of the personal liberties that we were losing as Americans on a daily basis. But once I retired and had some time to think about it, I'm like, I started to observe all these things and connect the dots. Like, as an example, when I was an entrepreneur, I had one account that had, it had maybe five or $600,000 in it. And this is with a big name bank. And this is not like a community bank or anything like that. This is one of probably the top three banks in the United States. And one day I woke up and my account balance was just zero. I'm like, okay, well, that sucks. That's over $500,000. And fortunately, I didn't need the money to run the business or anything like that. But that's real money. So I got in contact with them. I said, what the hell's going on here? And they said, well, we had to freeze the money. And I said, well, what are you even talking about? They said, because you had all these suspicious transactions. And I go, there were
Gee.
literally no transactions. I was not using this for business. This was just an account, like a savings account, basically, where I was dumping money. So what would happen is I'd have all the batches come in from the credit card processing. And then I would take once the money got up to whatever, let's say 100,000, I didn't need more than that for working capital. So I'd take the excess above and beyond 100,000 and I just dump it into this account. And so that was, and then once I did that, I dump it into somewhere else. But that was kind of like a holding account. And so there were no transactions. It's not like they could sit there and say, "Oh my gosh, you spent money at this marijuana shop or something like that." There was
Right.
nothing like that.
You got
And
wires. Yeah,
yeah,
like you got wires coming in from Nigeria or whatever. It's like, no, I mean, but this is the environment we live in now. I'm laughing while you're talking because I just got off the phone with Interactive Brokers and I literally I just took the knife away from my throat, like right before we started the call. You can't take it. You cannot take these people who are so unproductive. And she's like, no, all you have to do is fill this in here. I'm like, I can't get off this screen. Like nobody there even knows what to do to help you open an account. It's unbelievable. And the government is like times 10, right? With that
yep,
level of incompetence. But everything now can be called suspicious. Everything now is, like, oh, there was some kind of strange transaction. Sorry, we took all your money. Now you got to
yeah.
argue to get it back. Like it's just nuts.
That's exactly what I had to do. I had
Yeah.
to not only argue to get it back, I had to have a note from my accountant. I had to have a note from a recognized lawyer and all these things. And I mean, it was just, and it's my money for at the end of the day.
Yeah, for
Let's
heaven's
not forget.
sakes. Yeah.
So
If you think offshore structures like where to bank, how to invest in foreign real estate, and where to set up your foreign trust are difficult or complicated, they're not. That's not the hard part of creating an international lifestyle. The hardest part is the decision to go. That's why I wrote Secrets of the Expat Adventure, to share with you a deeply personal view of what happens when you decide to cast off the chains of a normal life full of predictable outcomes. I don't want to spoil the ending for you, but you quickly discover yourself living your best life, the life you were meant to live, instead of the one you're stuck with. Across 156 pages, I'll share the incredible adventure I've enjoyed because of my decision to leave my old life behind and create an international lifestyle. I lay out for you the consequences of remaining in a life or location where everything is familiar, contrasting that with the almost magical growth and gain that is possible once you decide to take the path of adventure. There's something deeply mysterious about choosing an adventurous life. Once you commit, helpers appear, and events seem to unfold in an almost magically choreographed manner. You find yourself learning, living, and loving your life in a way that you thought you'd lost forever. There is no financial gain that compares with the recovery of the best parts of yourself. Fortunately, the decision to internationalize is also a great way to get wealthy. I give you real examples of how much easier it was for me to find and profit from the real estate and other investment opportunities I came across simply by choosing to play on the very uneven playing field of developing markets. If you're worried about what's happening in your home country and you're on the fence about whether or not you should create your own plan B, Secrets of the Expat Adventure will give you clarity and inspiration to choose your own path of freedom and adventure. I promise you'll never look at your life the same way again once you discover what an international lifestyle can do for you, your family, and your wealth.
To get your copy, click the link below this video.
My point there is I just started to recognize more and more of these things for what they actually were. Another great example is going to the bank and saying, yeah, I'd like to withdraw, $2,000, and then just getting the 100 questions from the gal behind the counter, the teller there. Oh, what are you going to do with the money? Oh, what do you do for work? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you start to notice those things and you start to see it from a different lens,
Yep.
and you start to realize that wait a minute, they're not being nice. They're
Yeah,
fishing for data. They're fishing
that's right.
for information to use against you in the future. Now, that little $10 an hour gal isn't doing that, obviously. She's just following orders.
Just following
But the
orders.
reason that she's doing that, and that's coming down from the top, is so they can take that information and send it to, the NSA, or I don't know where the hell it goes, just so they can keep a file on you, so you can, so they can determine whether or not you're quote unquote suspicious based on whatever parameters they have for that. And usually, what would qualify you as someone who is suspicious is just someone who values freedom and liberty.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So,
like wanting to be left alone does
yeah,
make you a person of interest, actually. It
yeah,
does.
yeah. So I just I saw the writing on the wall. And I'm like, let's just try to see what it's like outside the United States. And I had an advantage there because I'd lived outside of the United States growing my business prior to retiring. So it wasn't that scary. And even investing overseas, it wasn't like this big unknown that, do I really want to take the plunge? So I went down to South America, to Ecuador, and I saw some opportunities down there, and I invested in a couple real estate deals. And then I went to Medellin because the price of oil was getting pretty cheap, and I knew that their currency was loosely tied to oil. So that was the genesis of the first trip to Medellin, which was 2014. And I immediately fell in love with the place. I bought a piece of property here. It was a big remodel. And so I bought my team up from Ecuador. And we were only going to do that one project, but it's like the more time I spent here, the more I really enjoyed it. And it really turned into like, okay, I could live anywhere in the world, but I can't find a place that I like more than this.
Yeah.
So why not just live here? And why not
Here,
just
here.
spend more time here?
Yeah,
And so,
here. If you're watching this and you haven't been to Medellin, you really owe it to yourself. The lifestyle, the quality of living, everything's new there. All the construction is like in the last 20 years, give or take. You know better than me, but I mean it's tremendous. They have that everything is that red brick that's made locally, and so they have tremendous high quality construction. Like all the new apartments, everything's renovated or damn near. Not every part of the city, but your part of the city especially is tremendous, tremendous lifestyle. And I don't think I've been to a place where there's less problems. I mean, there's a little bit of traffic, but you can deal with it, right? It's
mm,
certainly no worse than most US cities. But what a stunning, stunning visually the city is stunning because the views go in all directions and it's a walking city. I mean, there's whole areas where you can just walk around at night. There's no like you don't see people causing problems. There's nobody like starting fights or like drunk assholes like you
yeah,
see in most parts where you're real like I was in Austin. I'm going back to Texas here in a little bit. And I was in Austin maybe 2 years ago, and it's tense, right? Even 2 years ago, like, there's people looking for trouble, everywhere you go. And it's like this is a super, super nice city. So you owe it to yourself to check out Medellin. If you're watching this channel, absolutely get down to Colombia. If you're even thinking about Plan B kind of locations, it's got to be the top of the list for city living. Please
yeah.
continue.
And for the most part, the authorities, if you want to call them that, they pretty much leave you alone.
Yep.
Like we don't have like a militarized police force here. The cops, they just ride around on these little motorcycles, but they're not like the $50,000 Harley like you
Yep.
have in the United States. They're just these little like dirt bikes, these little 250cc dirt bikes, and they put two cops on each motorcycle.
Hmm.
Um, and honestly, I don't know. I've seen it a couple times as far as the police actually pulling someone over, but it's incredibly rare. Like I have the whole 10 years I've been here on and off, I've maybe seen that cane 5 times.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, nobody
now,
is looking for trouble. Yeah.
Now what they'll do occasionally, which I don't like, but they'll do, is they'll set up a little like roadblock up on Palmas just to check to make sure you've got your papers,
Yep.
like your registration, and they want you to have like a fire extinguisher in the back. It's one of the local little rules here. So the cops will look to see if you got a fire extinguisher. So that's annoying. So
Yeah.
that's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is when the cop, you're speeding or just you don't have your seatbelt on or something like that, and the police are actually pulling you over for that. That is incredibly, incredibly rare here. And there's a lot of things that it's not all rainbows and sunshine. If you're starting a business here in a particular area, that can be burdensome for sure. I don't know that it would be more burdensome in the United States, but you do have, it's like any other place. The government's insane. It's not like the government's
That
perfect
doesn't
down
change.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're insane. They've got crazy, crazy rules. But for the most part, the government leaves you alone because they don't have the resources.
Yeah.
So this is something that I don't think a lot of Americans realize, and they need to, is outside of the United States, you can't just look at the laws. You have to look at the laws as they are applied, and maybe more specifically, if they are applied. And so, what a lot of Americans will do is they'll look, on their computer or something like that, and they'll say, "Oh my God!" Like I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical here. Oh my gosh, there's a helmet law in Medellin or in Colombia, and I hate wearing my helmet riding my motorcycle, so I'm never going there.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is, yes, there is a helmet law. There
And
is.
nobody cares.
There's also stop signs, and people don't pay any attention to those. There's
Yeah.
stoplights. People don't pay any attention to those.
Yeah.
You're supposed to. I didn't even know if this is a law, but I would assume that it is. You're supposed to have like a child seat for a kid. I mean, nobody does that. Like you could have a 1-year-old. Nobody does that. Where if you do that in the United States, they're sending you to jail or something
Yeah,
like that, or taking
exactly.
your kid away from you.
Well, you bring up two things because, or you didn't bring this up, but I'll bring it up because you also nailed Medellin coming out of a really, really nasty time. And
Yeah.
these places, and that's what happened to me. I arrived in Guatemala in 1999. They signed the peace accords in 96. And so every year that I go back to Lake Atitlan, the place is dramatically, noticeably more pleasant, more affluent. There's more construction every year. I just got back from the lake about a month ago now as we're recording this, and everything gets better, right? And so these places that come out of really hard times are like coiled springs, and you really nailed the timing on that with real estate. And you even got down there and you started like a reality TV show
Yeah.
for real estate. This is a great story. Even though you didn't speak Spanish, you just pitched the TV station on it. So like, people don't think of going to a place like this is a major city. There's 5 million people, give or take, in Medellin. And here's a guy who shows up, real estate a little bit, but like you're just starting out with what you were doing there. I know you had some real estate experience in the US before, but then you just pitched the local TV station like, listen, this TV show works in other parts of the world. We're going to do one here. I'm your guy. When do we start shooting?
That's right.
And they went for it, and they
Yep.
absolutely went for it, and you crushed it with that, and then built a whole real estate portfolio. So like you have to think of other parts of the world as being especially if it's on the way up, especially if it's a coiled spring coming out of hard times, where there are real opportunities to just arbitrage stuff that you already know works in a place like the US or Canada or wherever. Do you agree? Am I off base here? I mean, I know it wasn't easy for you to do that, but can you say more about your experience with that and sort of bring us up to the present moment with your current offering with Rebel Capitalist too? Mavericks Project is a private community focused on powerful connections, trusted information, and time-tested solutions to create and preserve wealth during our epoch of extreme change. The Mavericks Project was born out of the social, economic, and geopolitical schism that kicked off in 2020. A small band of contrarian misfits spent the lockdown years observing problems, analyzing the implications, and plotting solutions. Now, several times a year, we Mavericks get together in fun and fascinating locations to talk about solutions to the social dangers to your family's safety and how to avoid them, the increasing state surveillance and how to negate it, the rapidly declining U.S. empire and how we want to position for what's coming next, the risks to your family's generational wealth and how to protect it. If you think you have what it takes to be a Maverick, this is your chance to come make new and better friends with some of the most accomplished people you will ever meet. Join us from November 4th to 7th in Dallas, Texas for 3 unforgettable days of action, discussion, and answers. The link for the event, along with all the details, is below this video.
I completely agree. I think the first place that really hit me hard was when I went to Australia. And this is before they went completely, off the rails. This would have been 2010 or so. And I remember just going through the mall there and seeing all of the products they were selling that were not US products, but they were exact replicas. So basically what they were doing in the mall, like at the kiosks and whatnot, is they were just looking at what sold a lot in the US and then just doing that in Australia and just naming it something different. And I'm like, that's actually a pretty good idea. Look at your asymmetry there. You got huge upside, not too much downside if you know well that it's going to succeed due to the fact that it's done so well in the United States. So that was actually kind of the genesis of the TV show in Medellin in 2019 was, look, what's my downside? Because I'm going to do one of these HG TV shows that at the time were wildly popular in the US. And I'm like, why wouldn't they be popular in South America and Spanish speaking countries? And they've already proven the model. So, this is kind of a no brainer. But I think you could take that approach with a lot of different things. So, I was the executive producer. I owned the TV show. And the objective there was just to break even on the show because I was splitting the advertising dollars with the station. And then it was to grow the brand. And the reason I wanted to grow the brand is because once we had that established, then I could white label things such as paint and sell that at the local Home Depot. They call it Home Center here, but the local Home Depot. And then, I could go from paint to, and again, what am I doing? I'm literally just copying the exact same business model.
Somebody already did the market research. Like we already know this works. Like you just knock it off and arbitrage that entire business model into a new market.
And it's something that people had never even seen here.
Yeah, no. That's another thing here. Yeah, most people do not understand. Like the first time this occurred to me, I was in Europe in 97 to 98. And I remember thinking, like walking around, I was in Switzerland, but I toured a lot of Europe, and you go to various places, and this is like the highest level. Like Zurich is not, it's not a backward town, right? It's a major, serious financial hub. I went to Paris, I went here, I went there. You go to these cities and you realize, like, wait a second, like this is like this stuff was in the US was popular 10 years ago, or whatever the time frame was. And then you start to realize, like, oh, that's how fads and fashions and trends spread. It takes that long for something that we already thought of as like a little bit passé was really catching on in Europe at that time. And that was the first time I was really exposed to that. But those kinds of opportunities are, like you said, like a mall kiosk, selling some kakachka that sold big in the US 5 years ago could be a major money earner, in another part of the world at some future date,
Yeah.
There you have it.
Then you just let the United States market do the research for you.
Bang.
You just cherry pick, and then you just set that up, hopefully at low cost in your local market, and, just throw 10 things up against a wall.
Yeah.
And a few of them are going to stick if they're working in the US, and then you just play that arbitrage. So I think that's a great opportunity for people who are more entrepreneurial, as well as looking for kind of like a plan B or maybe even a plan A, because they want to increase their levels of freedom and liberty. And also they see what's happening in the United States. And although the United States might be at a higher level in some areas, you got to look at the trajectory. And the trajectory, I would argue, is down, unfortunately. I don't like to say that as an American citizen, but I think it's just being aware of the facts. Whereas a place like Medellin, although the Colombian president's completely psychotic, but he's a total socialist, but he's not very popular. So hopefully he'll be out. And he hasn't been able to do much damage because Colombia, like the United States, has a pretty decent check and balances, unlike Venezuela. So, but you look at Medellin and you see an upward trajectory. I'll give you another example. There's a lot of anecdotal things that I've noticed that I think say a lot about a developing market or an emerging market. And I think this would be applicable to wherever you were looking, Mexico, Montenegro, Croatia, and anything like that. And the first one is how many flights, direct flights, were there 3 years ago, and how many are there now, or 5 years ago? And when you see the amount of direct flights, in this case, Medellin to the United States, increasing like 5 times, like 5x, then you're like, okay, something's happening there where they've got some tailwind. And so when I first came here, as far as I can remember, the only direct flight was Miami. And then that went to, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just doing this off of memory. But then it went to Fort Lauderdale, then it went to Orlando. Then they might have always had a New York, but it was very sporadic. And now more recently, it's gone to Houston.
Yeah.
And they're extending the airport up there, and they've got plans to go direct. I believe it's Atlanta and Los Angeles and maybe Dallas or Denver. I can't remember, but you get my point. And when you're seeing something like that, you're seeing an emerging market that is really accelerating to the upside and has a lot of tailwind. Now, will it be the best country in the whole wide world? Maybe, it could go the opposite direction, but you're just looking at probabilities. You're just looking at the headwinds versus the tailwinds. And I think the United States has significant headwinds right now, especially at a social level. And this market has some, at least from an economic standpoint, has a lot of tailwinds. Another thing I would point out is IKEA. So when I first got here, there was no IKEA, no mention of it, nothing like that. And then there were some whispers back in maybe 2018 or something like that, Tane. And then they built one, sure enough, and they opened it. I think it was maybe 2024. It's very recently. So if you actually think about what goes into an IKEA, it's actually a really, really good economic indicator, especially if you're thinking about the middle class, which is in and of itself a great economic indicator. So, and I can't think about how much money they're going to spend on market research before building who knows how much those facilities cost. I would imagine, hundreds of millions to actually build it. And then you got to think about all the logistics and all the supply chains that have to be set. I mean, you're talking about $1 billion investment. So a company like IKEA, they're not going to take that lightly. They're not going to just flip a coin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So,
these people know what they're doing. If they're going to bring in furniture that folks are going to, some of them are going to take home and make by themselves. Like you're talking about an upwardly affluent kind of society that's definitely in an uptrend. So
well,
you're talking
about a growing middle class.
Bingo.
Because look at who they cater to. They don't cater to super affluent, and they don't cater to super poor people. They cater to an emerging middle class. And when you have an emerging middle class in an emerging market, that is a very good thing.
That's where money gets made. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
another tailwind.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of these things that are happening, and I would look for those types of things in other markets. But I think the bottom line is you have to get a list of what your priorities are, because your priorities might be different than my priorities. So as an example, one thing that's really important to me is weather. I do not like cold weather. And so here in Medellin, it's the same weather every single day as far as the temperature. They call it the Valley of Eternal Spring. And so every single day, the high temperature is right around 80, let's call it. And at night, the low temperature is usually 64, 65, something like that, depending on what elevation you're at. And so that's perfect for me. And so that for other people, that might not be a big deal. And other people,
ideal.
Yeah, and other people, they might want to go to a place where every single person speaks English. Well, although there are a lot of people that do speak English locally, it's not going to be like 99%. So that was not a big deal for me. Another thing, going back to the tailwinds, when I first got here, there were quite a few gringos here, but they weren't the type of people that you would actually want to associate with. They were bottom of the barrel. They were, I mean, scumbags, really.
Yeah.
They were
Cheap
just
drugs, cheap tail. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yep.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
And so I just kind of removed myself from that. But now you've seen a total 180-degree shift where the vast majority of gringos that are coming down here to live are really successful entrepreneurs
That's right.
and digital nomads. And as an example, I'm a member of a mastermind group here where you've got like 50 or 60 really, really high level guys. Like, and they're making 8, 9 figures, some of them,
Yeah, it's
or at least have
tremendous.
8, 9 figure businesses. I mean, these are guys that are kicking ass and taking names.
Yep.
And they're not just some guy that sells stuff on Amazon that makes 100 grand a year. These guys are like I said, very, very
Operators.
high level. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're movers and shakers. And the fact that they're choosing to come down to Medellin to not only live but to continue their business, and you've got this, it's like an opposite brain drain
Yeah.
where you've got so much talent coming in here because of all these tailwinds that we talked about. And that's just another thing that you see growing exponentially, which is very, very exciting, which you've got to add that to your, I guess, decision-making process.
I don't think enough people take that factor into consideration that, most people have heard the saying, like, you're the sum of the five
Oh
people
yeah.
net worth, the five people closest to you and all the rest. And there is real truth to that. But I know a little bit the crowd you run in because we went to dinner with some of them. I was busy when I'm down there. We had a great time. And you're always surrounding yourself with a tremendous, tremendous caliber of person. And I mean, these people are running businesses. They're running multiple businesses, many of
Yeah.
them. They're making tons and tons of money, and Medellin is their chosen headquarters, right?
Yeah.
Where they spend the majority of their time, or where they like to spend the majority of their time. If they have to travel for business, they want to get back to Medellin, right? Because like you, they really enjoy it there. And so all of that's true. But you also get to talk to and meet with and sort of rub elbows with some really interesting people in the online space. In the finance space, I know you took your yearly pilgrimage to St. Bart's, I think, recently, because I
Yeah.
saw a recent podcast from a gentleman you met there. Bring us up to speed. What is George Gammon doing these days? What's going on in the markets? What's the number one thing that people should be attentive to that maybe most people aren't paying attention to? What do you see happening right now, and what's coming next?
Well, I think the number one thing that people should pay attention to, a lot of people are paying attention to, and that would be the United States labor market. You look at interest rates, and they give you a very good representation as to the probabilities of future economic growth. I'm talking about nominal GDP, but they don't do a great job telling you the timing of declines in nominal GDP or the timing of substantial increases in nominal GDP. And when we rewind 2.5 years, we the yield curve inverted, which is a big, big red flag. And I'm talking about the twos and tens. That tells you that the smart money is really betting that longer term nominal GDP will be lower. Now, where I actually got that wrong, Tane, is I thought, okay, since this has been a recession indicator so many times in the past, and it's been a very powerful indicator with a extremely high success rate, I thought this must mean that we're on the brink of a recession now. That wasn't the case because that's not what the yield curve tells you. And I had to learn that. What the yield curve really tells you is not necessarily that you're headed straight for a recession, but that you are headed for lower nominal growth, nominal GDP. And so if we think back then, our starting point was so high that's why you have this big lag in getting to a recession because of all the stimmy checks and everything that was happening back then. I mean, nominal growth in the United States was like plus 10%. It's like double digits. So
Wow.
even if you do have it going down substantially, okay, it's going from 12% down to 4%. Now that's a big move down that the yield curve predicted precisely, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see a blowout in unemployment and you're going to see like negative real GDP, something that would be associated with a technical recession. But now it's a little different. The fact that the yield curve is no longer inverted, we have an uninversion, and usually that's when the stuff hits the fan, right? And so we've seen the labor market start to deteriorate rapidly, especially when you look at the revisions.
The
And that
revisions.
goes back to last year, which would really match up with that uninversion of the curve and kind of the cycle, the way it typically plays out. The point is, although the yield curve once again did a great job of predicting the future path of nominal GDP, what's a better indicator of timing there is the labor market. And I actually, by using AI, I took a lot of these indicators and I back tested them extensively. I started with like 30 indicators and everything from the yield curve to like the RPI, which is the Restaurant Performance Index. And I tried to just eliminate as many as I could that had no better probability than a coin toss. And what it did is I took it from maybe 30 indicators down to, I think it was like 5, 6, something like that, that really represented the signal from the noise. And the number one out of those was non-farm payroll, non-farm payroll and initial claims. So again, the labor market. And we see that deteriorating rapidly. I mean, you look at the most recent non-farm payrolls, and they've been terrible. You have the revisions for June that went down to negative 13,000. Most people don't realize that that number, the headline number, started at 147,000.
Yeah.
It goes down to negative 13. And
Yeah.
then with these most recent benchmark revisions for April 2024 to March of 2025, we saw a downward revision of almost 1 million jobs.
911,000 jobs went
That's
away.
right. And it
Yeah.
actually took a couple months in 2024 negative. So then the question becomes, okay, how many times in, let's just say going back to the 1970s, have we had negative non-farm payrolls and not been in a recession?
And the answer is
Very few, very few. Although it has happened, it's far and few between. So usually when you get these negative non-farm payrolls, it's either in or around a recession. So technically in 2009, we were out of a recession if you look at MBER, but we still had some negative non-farm payrolls because the labor market was just so weak. But usually when you see a non-farm payroll outside of that recession time frame, it's because of a weather event. So it's like an anomaly. So you'll have like a hurricane or something like that where the Gulf states will be completely shut down. And for that 1 month, and you won't see a trend. You'll just see it, the non-farms kind of going like this, then a huge dip down negative, and then boom, right back up. And or you have a huge strike, like for one of the big employers in the United States, like let's just say Walmart. But outside of that, it's extremely rare. So what's I think important to recognize now is not only do we have this string of negative non-farm payrolls, and we're not even done with the revisions, by the way, but you see a trend where we go from, I think it was maybe 600,000 jobs, 2 or 3 years ago, because we had that bounce back from the lockdowns. And you see it go down, 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 to a point where you're negative. And when you combine the negative non-farm payrolls with the trend, with the fact that we've had multiple negative non-farm payrolls, that just increases the probabilities that the United States economy is either in or headed for a recession. Now, does that mean the stock market goes down? Who knows? Because a lot of times bad news is good news. I think it really depends on the recession itself. So do we have just like a .com, like a garden variety kind of balance sheet recession, or do you have like a liquidity event where it would be more of a quote unquote crisis like the GFC? If you have something where the unemployment rate or even the loss of jobs. Because what's weird about the unemployment rate right now is you've got the labor force participation declining at a level where it really doesn't increase the unemployment rate, but you're still losing massive amounts of jobs. And at the end of the day, that's what's important. It's how many people are working in the economy. And so if you get to a level, and I don't know really where the line in the sand would be, but I think this is something that should really be on people's radar. And this might be applicable to your original question because it should be on people's radar and it's probably not. And that would be the passive flows into the S&P 500. So my good friend Mike Green, who was also in St. Bart's, talks about this all the time. And I actually had about a 3-hour conversation with Mike during lunch one of the days where we were talking about the models that he has created to determine when there's that paradigm shift, when there's that tipping point where we go from net inflows into passive to net outflows.
These are 401ks. These are managed accounts that automatically invest in great big market cap stocks like Nvidia. Every time you get your paycheck, some portion of that is being invested passively into there. And he's saying like the real tipping point is when those inflows turn to outflows.
That's right. Because if you believe that the reason the stock market is where it is today, which I don't know how you could dispute this, is a large part due to these passive inflows. So what that means is it's a dollar going into the market that is non-discretionary.
Yeah.
So a dollar goes into the market, a dollar buys, and it just buys whatever the weighting of the S&P 500 is. There's no discretion whatsoever.
Whatever's big gets bigger. Like that's where the money goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happens is if the dollar leaves, then you sell. And that's Mike calls that the simplest algorithm of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening. So the problem there is when you get the majority of the players that are passive, then who's your buyer if there's a net outflow, right?
Yeah.
Because what's happening, let's just say there's $100 total in the market. Let's assume that you have $50 that's active, like hedge fund managers, guys like our friend Chris McIntosh, and then $50 that's just passive. Okay, well, if there's passive outflows, those stocks are going to plummet. But the guys like McIntosh are going to come in and they're going to be like, wait a minute, now they're on sale. I'm going to come in and buy. But let's take it to an extreme. Let's say 100% of the market is just passive and you have a net outflow. There's no bid.
It's a nightmare. Yeah, exactly.
There's
like
no bid.
air pocket. Yeah.
There's no bid. So that's, I think, although Mike's been talking about this a lot, I don't know if your average Joe and Jane retail investor have really thought that one through. So the punchline there is Mike, based on his models, thinks that if the unemployment rate goes to maybe 5.5, that will trigger the net outflow. That will be the tipping point. But again, that doesn't include, the amount of job losses that really aren't calculated into the unemployment rate due to the labor force participation declining. So one of the other things that was interesting that we were talking about during that 3-hour lunch was how AI might impact the unemployment rate.
I was going to ask you, to what degree are the revision of non-farm payrolls? Is that AI impacting already? Do you ascribe some portion of the downward revisions? Are people losing their jobs because AI is on the scene and companies are already putting people out of work?
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of people are losing their jobs, but I definitely think it's affecting hiring. So as an employer, you're like, okay, this AI tool is neat. It needs to progress quite a bit in order for me to use it, with 100% of my business. But right now I can use it for maybe 10% of my business. And therefore, I'm not going to fire everyone as a result. But if I have some people quit, I'm not going to hire anyone because first and foremost, I'm going to try to see if I can replace them with AI before I have to deal with another employee.
Yeah,
and see how it works. So I think that's kind of more what's happening right now. And that in long term, I'm not a catastrophic AI person. I don't think, I think on net balance, it's going to be a huge benefit to society, and it probably will create a lot more jobs than it destroys. The problem is getting from A to B.
Yeah.
And getting from A to B, the unemployment rate, all else being equal, goes up to a certain level, you could see those net outflows from passive. And because passive is such a huge percentage of the overall market, that could mean a big air pocket down. And you
Yeah.
hit that big air pocket down, and then you think through the fact that the economy in the United States is totally propped up by asset prices. I mean, totally propped up. You can imagine that the devastation if the S&P 500 went down by 50% and
Yeah.
stayed there for, let's just say, 3 years. And in addition to that, let's say housing went down by 50% and stayed there for 3, 4, 5 years. That's not a prediction, but that's a thought experiment. If that were to happen, think what aggregate demand would do in the United States. It would plummet. It would absolutely plummet. Whereas, going back to your international mindset, if you look at an economy like Colombia, if the stock market were to go down by 50% here, I don't know that it would even make the news
Yeah, exactly.
because
Exactly.
it's literally irrelevant to the economy because nobody owns stocks.
Right.
Nobody owns stocks. Now, if the real estate market went down here by 50%, that would probably get headlines. But the probability of that is extremely low because no one has a mortgage.
Uh-huh.
So not, I'm exaggerating, but I would say out of 80% of the house, or out of 100% of the housing stock here, maybe 15 or 20 at the most
Yeah, I mean,
has
if
a
prices fall
mortgage
that
tied
much
to it.
in Medellin, I'm getting on a plane and going shopping
Yeah,
because
but I don't know how they could because
no, I don't. I
outside of
think
something like COVID, like when the government locks everyone in a cage and you have some sort of central planning, you know,
circus.
draconian
Yeah.
policy, then yeah, you quickly saw prices come down quite substantially then because no one knew what the hell was going to go on and people were just kind of fire selling. But but people were fire selling because they wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
not because they have to. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the big difference with leverage. Like you saw the fire selling during the GFC, and that was people selling because they had to,
Mm-hmm.
because they couldn't make the mortgage payment. It was totally unaffordable. So
Mm-hmm.
they had to just sell at whatever price and take the loss. Where here, no one's in that position because they don't have a mortgage. And their livelihood is not dependent upon the equity they have in their apartment or in their house. It's
It's a
almost,
big difference. Yep.
yeah, it's very similar to the way most of the savers in the United States hold gold, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, when are you going to sell? Never.
Mm-hmm.
That's very similar to the real estate here. And the point is they're not in a position to where they have to sell. And therefore, in that dynamic, it's really tough to see a huge contraction or a decrease in overall prices.
Well, I had Chris on about 10 days ago now, maybe a little less. And, I said, what's the most important thing for people to pay attention to now? And he talked about the equities and the share of the world market that is parked in US equities is so top heavy now. Like it dwarfs anything. Japan in 89, like it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's so far out of balance that again, like it gives you the kind of sick feeling in your stomach to think like absolutely nothing can go wrong in the world and in the United States, like until further notice, if we're going to get through this. And that's just not likely to happen. There's so many pieces moving. People are getting assassinated,
yeah.
God help us. Terrible stuff, and like all of these things that are coming and rolling like like a dark cloud, on the horizon. And you're sitting there looking at it going, okay, well, it's a lot to keep track of. So all of that is to say, thank God that guys like you are out doing what you're doing, because I really mean it. I may call this episode that Rebel Capitalist may be the best education you can get for the money, because I know you're in there every day putting videos together, teaching people about what's going on. I read the comments. I know people who sign up for your service, and it's just world class. It's just an excellent, excellent thing. So you deserve all your success, my friend. It's really great to
Thank
see.
you very much. And I
Thank
think
you.
the key there is people think in terms of probabilities. So obviously, we're great friends with Chris, both of us. Chris is a business partner of mine. What Chris is not saying, and I can say this with 100% confidence because I know him so well, is he's not saying the S&P 500 won't go up. No one
Right.
would say that because
Right.
it could double from here. Like you don't know. This is the hysteria and the mania of crowds that we're dealing with. So it could double, it could triple, it could quadruple. But what are the probabilities of that? And what's your downside risk versus your upside potential? And so that goes back to your asymmetry. And a lot of people, when you talk about the stock market being in a massive bubble, they're like, okay, well, they assume that you only have two options. Number
Yeah.
one, be in all cash, or number two, be all in the S&P 500 or all in Nvidia or something like they assume like, or
Pure
they talk.
binary, yeah,
Yeah,
pure
like those
binary
are
kind
your
of
only
thought. It's like,
two
well, if
options.
you're not this, it must be the other, it must be B. And it's like, no, actually, you don't have to invest that way. You don't have to think
Right.
that way.
Like as an example, one thing that's worked extremely well for me is being in gold and being in the gold miners. I think I sold some of my gold about 2 months ago and bought the GDXJ. And I mean, that's up just since I bought it. I think it's up
Screaming.
maybe
Yeah.
25, 30, 35%, something like that. Way better than the S&P 500.
Yep.
And I'm just using that as an example because at the time, the risk reward was way better on GDXJ than it was the S&P 500. Now they both went up. They both went up, but just because I wasn't, triple leveraged long the S&P 500 doesn't mean that you're not making money in a way that's far more prudent and to
Yeah.
where you're playing the odds and you're playing those asymmetric bets, which at the end of the day is what the one thing that every single successful investor has in common.
It's a
They
skill, thinking in
they make
probability.
asymmetric bets.
Yes, and thinking in probabilities is a
Yep.
skill. It's one of the things that you teach people. It's one of the things that Chris articulates so well and that you guys do so well for your readers is like, obviously we're not predicting where things are going. That's let the amateurs do that, right?
Yep.
Predicting prices and predicting levels and like, oh, it's going to go to here. The moment I see that, that kind of clickbait stuff, you're dealing with somebody who either doesn't know what they're talking about, or if they do, right, it's just bad marketing. It's like, we don't know where, but the probabilities are this and this and this, and here's why, and here's what we see. And that's what Chris and that's what you guys and Lynn, obviously Lynn Alden's part of your team. You put together such it's a star-studded cast, isn't it? But you guys do such a good job just bringing people along because it's not natural for people to think that way. Like most people do
No,
not think in probabilities. I don't know how
no.
I picked it up, but I weighed certain possibilities in my life and then sort of rated them with various probabilities, and it's really served me, right? I realized somewhere along the way, not many people think that way.
Yeah. Another great example I can give that I think most people can relate to is playing blackjack.
Mm-hmm.
So most people don't understand how to play this game, and assume that you're sitting at the table and you have a 19. Now, assuming, let's just say that your buddy is there and he's kind of had a few drinks and he's, punching you in the arm and saying, you got to hit on 19, you got to hit on 19. And you look at him, you're like, what? Like, no, that's that's way against the probabilities. The odds are that I'm going to lose and I'm going to bust. I'm going to go bust. But let's say, just to humor him, you go ahead and hit and you get a two. You got blackjack. You won. Right? Now, does that mean that you did the right thing?
No, it was still a bad decision because if you think in bets, right? There's actually a book called Thinking in Bets. It's worth reading. I mean, it's nothing earth-shattering. It's kind of explaining what George just explained. But no, the answer is you made a bad decision, not because you didn't win by getting a 2 and ending up with 21, because if you think in probabilities, that's not the correct decision. And
Right.
more often than not, obviously, you're going to bust. So getting lucky once doesn't mean that it was a smart thing to do. I
And it's
mean,
the
there's a
same thing with the S&P 500. Is it
bingo.
possible for it to go up? Yeah, but it's also possible for you to get a two when you're
Yeah.
sitting on 19. Another thing I'll say, because I've done some research on this quite a bit over the last couple weeks, is this idea that all you have to do is just buy and hold. Well, just buy and hold, Tane. I'm a long-term investor. So if I just buy and hold the S&P 500, sure, you might have a decline, but if I hold it for 10 years, then I'm going to come out ahead and I'm going to make my 10 or 12% per year. And this is total nonsense. This
It
is a
is
bill
not
of
true.
goods that has been sold to people by financial planners
Mm-hmm.
and the mainstream media and the social media influencers and whatnot. And what they'll do, here's the trick, is they only go back to 1980
Mm-hmm.
and they'll
Bingo.
take a chart back to 1980 and they'll say, well, look, you see?
Yeah.
And then they'll just kind of take the 2000s from 2010, or excuse me, from 2000 to 2010, and they'll kind of sweep that one under the rug.
Yeah.
And they'll just focus on the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2010s and say, look, if you would have bought the dip, if you would have bought and hold, you would have made 20% a year, blah, 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 blah. And you would have very little downside risk. And, you wouldn't have had to pay a fund manager their fees and all these things. So just buy an S&P 500 index fund, the lowest cost possible. Just, plug your nose. If it's at all-time highs, who cares?
Terrible
Just
advice.
buy it
Yep.
30 PEs or whatever it is, and you're going to come out ahead. Now, if you go back to 1930, let's say, in the last 9 decades, let's say 1930 to 2020, you see it's a completely different story.
You got murdered. Yeah.
Well, if you adjust for inflation, there were 4 decades where you made money. There was 1 decade where you were basically flat, and then 4 decades where you lost money.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about a coin toss.
Coin
By the
toss,
way,
yep.
what you do there for a variable, Tane, is you look at those decades where you actually made money and you see where the PE ratios were for the S&P 500 going into that decade.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 0 examples of the PE ratios being over 20. And so then the question becomes, okay, where were they in 2020? The answer is higher than 20. And where are they now? Roughly 27. And by the way, I saw a report from our good friend Brent Johnson, and he pointed out that right now the S&P 500 is at an all-time high as far as the valuation price to sales, even higher than it was in the dot-com bubble. And I believe it's 3.3 times when the average is about 1.5. So that's what you're buying into right now.
It's
so based on
scary.
those probabilities, and when you adjust for inflation, what do you think the odds are that if you buy at these nosebleed levels and just hold for the next 10 years, that you're actually going to make that 10 or 12% return that all the financial planners promise you? The
Lost
odds are
decade.
incredibly low.
Yep. The odds are you could go nowhere for a decade.
Well,
Those are
the odds are that you will go nowhere, and the odds are that you'll actually lose purchasing power
right.
in terms of inflation adjusted over the next decade.
Yeah. George, you've been very generous. You've given us a lot of your time. Where can people find you? What's the best place to get a hold of Rebel Capitalist? We know the YouTube channel. You still onboarding people? Your community's still growing?
Yeah, they can check out the community, the service that you're talking about that I have with Chris McIntosh, Lynn Alden, Brent Johnson, Patrick Stresna, Jason Hartman. It's at, what is the URL? rcp.georgegammon.com/pro.
We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, I'll give you the link there so you can put it in. Thank you for letting me plug that.
Thanks very much. Great to talk to you as always. Those of you who are thinking about Plan B, those of you who are inspired by some of the people we talked to on here, if you'd like to get in touch with me, that's what we do here. I have a great legal team behind me, and we help you set up your Plan B the right way. It doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg, but understand that the kind of chaos that we're living through now could very well cost you in more ways than financially. There's no reason for that to happen. You can live your best version of your life by setting yourself up properly now and not worrying about future generations. Get through the next period of maybe 5-10 years of real chaos. We don't know how long it's going to last, but we're definitely in it. If you're paying attention, you already know that. So reach out to me. The link is below this video. George, thanks again very much. Good to talk to you always, buddy.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
All the best. Yep. Take care.